Right, hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today as we speak about disinformation in Africa. I'd like to just first of all thank our partner who is supporting this event, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Sub-Saharan Africa. They've been amazingly supportive of this project. And of course, our media partner, Daily Maverick. Thank you so much for having us today. And thank you so much to my fellow talkers today, Phumzile van Damme, the former Shadow Minister for Communication in South Africa, and the CEO of Data Fight in Nigeria, Joshua Olufemi. Thank you so much for joining me today, you two.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here to talk about this. I just want to do some quick introductions. Joshua, perhaps you could tell us, you're someone who's had a lot of experience in the media space, 8 years or more now, working in open data advocacy, media development, and investigative journalism. And you've now taken on the role of CEO of DataFi. Tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to and how you've been engaging with disinformation over the past 2 years.
All right, thank you. I mean, the challenge that the media is having, it's you can say there are a lot of them, from financial sustainability to content diversification, to the everyday gagging by government of the freedom of the press and freedom of expression, and then how to also give voice and give voice to the voiceless and hold everybody to account. And the last, say, 8 to 12 years, you can say, my work is, being from, promoting media plurality to thinking about media sustainability, which became more of a bigger issue and one big tool. If you look at the financial challenges of the media, one big tool that government and corporates are using to, continue to control the press or, ensure that they silence the press, as it were. So since 2014, that has been a major part of my work. How do you combine technology, data, and social accountability function of the media to generate revenue for the media, but also to keep the conversations going and to begin to cultivate the next generation of media entrepreneurs and media practitioners. And having done that so well successfully with my former organization, the European Center for Investigative Journalism, I thought it was important that we create, the intersection of data. With to begin to respond to the bigger challenges of misinformation, disinformation, but much more media literacy and information, like proliferation. For lack of a better word. But all of this has been tied to what you see with both, the global and our own, local or regional government, trying to use every tool of influence, every tool of, public relations, advertising, technology, to continue to control or influence how people think or perceive their policies and malpractices, if you like. And that has been one major issue, and why we thought in my former organization to begin to approach this from a point of fact-checking. And that was why Dubai was set up about 3-4 years ago, and having done that quite well to monitor election or to fact-check elections, to fact-check the COVID-19, it has become a bigger brand. The team I led behind of doing the great work, and they're moving it across the Sub-Saharan Africa to Ghana, Sierra Leone, and very soon they're going to be in other Anglophone African countries. So primarily at the moment, it's great to see how data can also power or catalyze the fight against misinformation and disinformation in Africa.
Absolutely, and I feel like there's no one who knows better what it's like to take on entities using PR and misinformation than our friend here, Phumzile van Damme. Thank you so much for joining us. Phumzile, you've recently been recognized internationally for your work in combating disinformation. And I'd love to know how much of that had to do with our mutual interaction, which is the film Influence, which I co-directed, by the way, with my co-director, Richard Poplak, who would love to join us this evening, but sadly he's off slaying narrative dragons at the moment, so he couldn't join us. But we shot with you. You were a primary character in our film Influence. We shot with you back in 2019, and how much has changed since then. Tell us a little bit about this recognition that you've recently received and what you've been up to.
Yes, it was mind-blowing, and actually took me a while. I haven't told you guys to watch because it was just so difficult to process. Like, oh my God, there's this documentary, and I'm in it, and it's like, whoa, little old me, what? But I eventually watched it, and I think gratitude to you guys for highlighting that, because I think the fight against disinformation is not only a South African fight, it's not only an African fight, it's a global one. And I think that was a great example to take onto the global stage of what could be considered as a little African country that was basically able to it was one of the world's biggest PR firms. So it was a really instructive example to other governments across the world. And the US is still struggling to this day, to be able to adequately tackle misinformation. So I think it was a great example of what can be done. And I think for me, the work from tackling Bob Pottinger grew what is a passion, and for tackling and combating disinformation. It's become a subject I read about daily because it's constantly moving. And it's a relatively new field because, the strategies that are used by actors change all the time. The solutions change, where it was from traditional fact-checking, where it was checking claims, where now it's, as Joshua mentioned, it's more using technology, more data science. So it feels like a lifetime ago, but in my more recent life, I was a member of parliament.
Yeah, not that long ago.
It feels like a lifetime ago. But the next project I'm going to be working on will be combating misinformation for our election, working with various NGOs, working with data scientists, working with behavioral scientists, because it's really important to understand how it is that information is consumed and how do we change the patterns of how online information is consumed. So it also feeds into media literacy, as Joshua spoke about. So it's going to be a really great test case to see, what different strategies can be applied in terms of changing how information is consumed online, because that is just as important as holding PR companies, as holding international influence operations, as holding tech companies themselves accountable. And I think that is something that we don't give as much attention to. So I think that's of equal importance.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we're going to get into in great detail in the next hour or so. We're getting some comments, and I'm sure we'll start getting some questions soon from our audience. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will be taking some of your questions shortly. Before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to make a short announcement about Influence. Thanks to the support from our partners, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, we have been able to make Influence available to watch for free on the African continent outside of South Africa. And shortly, we will be offering it in the UK for free as well. It's on a website that we've been able to build out that intends to bring other resources to bear to talk about how we can combat disinformation. And we will keep adding to that website and building on it as we go. So please do go over to influence.film. The link is in the comments section if you'd like to go and have a look and share far and wide. It's not often that one is able to make a film available for free for even any amount of time. And we really hope that you get some value out of that. So with that being said and all the admin out of the way, I wanted to read something that I found pretty hilarious, which is our dear friend Donald Trump, who we haven't heard from in quite the same way for quite some time, which has been refreshing. He sent a message to the Nigerian government recently, and he said, More countries should ban Twitter and Facebook for not allowing free and open speech. All voices should be heard. And I guess it's an interesting way to start our conversation. So much about this disinformation space, and you know, the irony of someone like Donald Trump tweeting something like that, or he can't tweet now, but sending a message like that, where he is probably the most adept human on the face of the planet right now at taking advantage of the disinformation machine. You know, making a statement like that, and the question really is, you know, who has the right to speak and where? That allows disinformation to proliferate, because you can always say, well, freedom of speech, I can say what I like, and if you want to hold me accountable, you can. The problem is that it is proliferated, it's disseminated so quickly, and as we know from research, disinformation travels faster than real truth and real facts. So I'd like to speak to both of you tonight about this problem in Africa, and maybe we can start with you, Joshua. Tell us a little bit about the situation in Nigeria right now. As we know, Muhammadu Buhari and his government have banned Twitter in Nigeria after it took down some of his comments. And you're currently in an internecine war with the Nigerian government. Please tell us a little bit more about what's happening.
Thank you so much. So it's like, you know, the same tool that you've used to manipulate and, you know, get yourself to power, coming back or fighting back. And the best thing to do from a point of naivety or from a point of intolerance is to want to fight back. That's how I want to describe, President Buhari and his administration's, Twitter ban. If you're a student of history, or history of elections in Nigeria, you see that the most fascinating, influencer machineries that brought Buhari to power played so well using Twitter as a tool to manipulate, to, let me say, promote, whichever agenda that was never, strong to get itself into power. And as the same, machine, if you like, or information machine, Twitter has now become a tool to demand accountability, to showcase some of the, inabilities or lack of, ideas of the government. It became a reason for Twitter to be shut down. And you would see that as much as that is to be done, people are fighting back. Technology becomes something that helps you to either navigate or circumvent those that want to, suppress the freedom of expression or the freedom of the press. But overall, I think it's for me part of the bigger plan. Part of the bigger plan to ensure that all the instruments that the administration used to, put itself in power, can either work to, perpetuate it in power, or be damned. And to damn it is to, ban Twitter. Twitter became a very great tool. Of course, it had its own downside for calling for police reforms in the country, and which, of course, was globally tagged EndSARS. And you would see that when that same tool was becoming something very choking for the government, it had to use force. And when the only way you could also narrate or curate the kind of human rights violation that process went through was also the use of Twitter. At every point in time, government tries to, promote its own, call it propaganda, call it policy. People also come back and then give their own opinion and perspectives, which I imagine are not always very suitable or very comfortable for the government, and they will continue to do this. The next question to ask is, if this, if they succeed with Twitter ban, what should we expect of every other, channel of, communication in the country? You've seen this already, asking for media organizations to register. We're asking, for the non-profit sector to begin to also subscribe to some you like, call it, you know, laws that are just as a way of just constraining or the freedom of expression in the country without taking it too far. I mean, just not taking time. I see it just trying to fight back what it used itself to come to power.
Absolutely. And in terms of the pushback, you know, as you mentioned, I'm curious. In South Africa, I suppose, Phumzile, you probably agree, South Africa's got quite a vibrant Twitter space, and I don't want to focus too much on Twitter itself, but as we for very brief, but in Nigeria, Joshua, is Twitter predominantly used as a kind of a platform for political discourse? Is there quite a kind of proliferation of ideas as there is in South Africa, of course, with all the other nonsense that comes with it? Does it feel as though a very big proportion of the conversation is now being blocked because Twitter has been banned?
You can say that again. I mean, because it's one thing to be able to have a conversation. It's another thing to be able to, you know, have it comfortably or in a free and enabling environment. So no matter how rich the conversation wants to be, because you have to circumvent, you have to go through different, if you like, call it firewall, to then begin to have conversations. That in itself adds some, you know, psychological, you know, strain or stress that it brings to it, which makes it even difficult to begin to have the kind of robust, you know, what I'll call reflexive or, you know, kind of conversation. Now you're bargaining with, is it worth the time? Is it worth the effort? Is it worth the technology to come to the place of this conversation? The other part of it is also that you're, you know, creating a splintering effect on the kind of conversations that we have. You can do the kind of, you know, thorough sentiment analysis of conversations that young people, the elites, are having, you know, on various issues, and more importantly, it's weakening the economy. And I'm coming from the point of, you know, businesses that survive on Twitter. You know, I mean, the same demography that the president had tagged lazy, found Twitter as a platform to sell, to promote, and to transact, and that you're taking away just for, I mean, your own selfish, you know, I would say, you know, reasons. I mean, so it's a lot of effect that is bringing it. The conversations are not, you know, as I would say diverse as it used to be. They cannot be harmonized. It cannot be harnessed for, you know, analysis or even for research, if you like. And then on top of that, the same people who, you know, have this conversation, you've weakened them economically, and now you're giving them more things. I mean, more concerns to worry about, rather than coming to Twitter to have the kind of conversation or the rich, you know, thought leadership that used to happen on the platform.
Right, and that was always such an important. Well, I think a phenomenon in that space was and social media in general was the ability to have these kind of far-reaching conversations with a much bigger range of people from all walks of society, including often leaders who would be forced to kind of account for themselves in to a certain extent. But then, of course, you have the opposite, where, you know, leaders are using it as a mouthpiece, often to spout disinformation. And as we've seen in South Africa, Phumzile, you know, I think back when we were filming with you, back when opposition politics was coherent, you know, as you say, it feels like a lifetime ago, because so much has changed in this space. And Twitter has become, and social media has become, a space for disinformation perpetrated by opposition politicians in the country. How are you feeling about that development?
I just wanted to say, firstly, to Joshua's point, it's been very disappointing from the South African government, but just generally from African governments, that a move such as banning Twitter is not responded to. It's a slippery slope, as Joshua says. You ban Twitter, what's next? So someone who finds a back channel to get on Twitter, what happens to them? Are they arrested? It's very frightening. And any kind of action that infringes on democracy like that infringes on freedom of speech should be responded to. So it's very disappointing that a dictatorial act like that is not responded to by our government. Just in terms of Trump, I think as politicians, there is a greater responsibility in terms of use of social media. As we saw with the Capitol riots, how someone like Donald Trump had such reach and credibility amongst certain, US voters, where they believed his misinformation that the election results were compromised, so much so that they believed they could start a revolution. So I think that Twitter and Facebook were right to come down on him as strongly as they did, because it is what was harmful misinformation. So I think we need to make that distinction between someone's tweeting, something, Anna's hair is red, which is wrong, which is misinformation, and between something that is harmful, which is misinformation that results in actual harm, like we saw at the Capitol riots. What I've noticed in South Africa over the last year has been a very well coordinated, properly funded misinformation campaign, like on xenophobia, which has sought to blame foreign nationals for all of South Africa's ills, for unemployment, for crime, which has been to build a platform for a political party to campaign quite effectively to say, we are the ones that are going to build a wall, as I heard Gayton McKenzie say, or, we are going to make sure that foreigners are kicked out. And that is something in a country where there's a history of xenophobic violence. So that is very harmful and dangerous misinformation. But so insidious is that campaign that it's been very difficult to find out the source, because that is the person that needs to be held accountable, or the entity that needs to be held accountable. So part of the work that we'll be doing during the election is to use data science and to use investigative journalism, to use forensic and online investigative journalism to be able to find the sources of that. And also working closely with the ISC to change the code of conduct to include misinformation, because I think politicians need to be held accountable for the misinformation that they put out there, not only in manipulating the public discourse, but also in misinformation that actually causes harm. It infringes on the ability for there to be a free and fair election. Every single party should have freedom of speech to go online, to share their offer to the electorate. The electorate should be able to consider it. They should be able to do so without being manipulated. And I think an important part of it is about changing the way we speak about misinformation. And this is the conversation that I've been having with a lot of individuals working on the global stage on misinformation, and behavioral science, is a way that we need to change the terminology we use. So fake news was the initial term, but then it was bastardized by people like Trump, where it lost its meaning and it lost its effectiveness. And then we moved into disinformation and misinformation, which are technical terms where people in the industry, so to speak, understand the distinction, but people don't understand it. So the term that I think should be used, for example, is viral deception, because it changes the way people consume information. So if you go online, you know that, okay, I am online. Here is information that has been posted. I know that I want to be online, but also I don't want to be deceived. So that puts an extra impetus for a person to verify the information, to think twice about whether or not this information true. So, in a nutshell, politicians need to be held accountable. For South Africa, we're going to be doing a lot of work reaching out to the IC about making sure that there's greater accountability towards political parties in the way they communicate, because it's important that with the online space being where political discussions take place, so much so that in Nigeria, the government taking a dictatorial step to take down Twitter because they understand the power of Twitter to influence political discourse, that a lot of the campaigning is happening online, using insidious means, using misinformation. So I think there needs to be far greater vigilance in South Africa, in the South African election, about the conversations that political parties and the manner in which politicians are communicating. And I think platforms need to be very strong in the action that they take against politicians, because they wield a lot of influence.
Absolutely. Tell us, the ISC, tell us who that is, and also be really interested to know the organization that you're working with at the moment. As you say, it sounds like a collective of people with different skills. Give us a sense of who's behind that fantastic sounding initiative.
Yeah, I mean, we've been kind of talking, and we'll kick it into gear in a month or two. I don't want to give names until we announce it properly, but it will be a collective of fact checkers, of investigative journalists, of behavioral scientists, of forensic with international organizations. So it will be a crew essentially that monitors the online space, that fact checks, that monitors and does investigations on influence operations, that hopefully with the work that we will have done with the ISC, where we can take information if it's from a political party and there has been the rules have been changed against, the manner against misinformation by the ISC, where sanctions can be handed down. We are going to reach out to the political parties themselves to have a, symbolic kind of commitment not to spread disinformation. So we've got a lot of exciting ideas that we're going to roll out in the next while. We just need to finalize them, and then we'll make the proper announcement. But I'm really, really excited about it. And I think it's going to hopefully be very effective, and also about conscientizing the public again about misinformation. I think if there is a people in the world that does not like being lied to and does not like being manipulated, it's the people of South Africa.
Agreed.
I think it was the people of South Africa who initially, told Bell Pottinger no. So much so that Bell Pottinger, a PR company, had to shut down their social media accounts, because on the online space, South Africans were united from all walks of life, from all races, and said, hell no, this will not happen. And I think through the work that we'll be doing, the public will again say that, no, we do not appreciate X individual, X organization, X international influence operation for deceiving us. So I think it's going to be important work. And I am not convinced that there is enough awareness of what a danger it is going to be in this election, of what a danger it is. So part of the work will also just be conscientizing the public, and advocacy and educating the public.
Absolutely. And just a little bit of context for those watching both inside and outside South Africa. The country is heading into municipal elections towards the end of the year. Of course, it's a difficult election year with COVID, but they are expected to go ahead. And as Phumzile is saying, given the trends that we've been seeing online, and the way that political parties and their support bases, both financial and otherwise, have been kind of operating in the last 2 years, it's clear that the threat of disinformation is becoming a real problem in South Africa. Just a bit of context as well regarding Balpottinger, as Phumzile was talking about. Many of you will recall Balpottinger was a British PR firm. I suppose you could call them the OG of disinformation. A long history of perpetrating and carrying out very successful communications and propaganda campaigns over many decades. And Phumzile played a huge role in having the company effectively shut down. She took them to the PRCA in London, the Public Relations and Communications Association in the UK, and which they were kicked out of, and shortly thereafter let out their client list and shut their doors. It was a great example of how civic action, investigative journalism, and proper opposition politics can really take on a malevolent force in the world, and certainly something we're very proud of in South Africa. And just on that note, we've got a question here from Anne Brown that I'll quickly answer before we move on to Joshua. She says, did you discover any link between Balpottinger and the Murdoch media empire, such as Fox News? The answer, Anne, is that Tim Bell, the former co-founder of Balpottinger, who's now died subsequently, was really big friends with Rupert Murdoch. They met in the UK, and as we know now, they had a very, very intimate relationship in terms of the campaign for Margaret Thatcher back in the 70s and 80s. One would feed information to the other in exchange for headlines, and it was a pretty tight relationship. So certainly there was a link there. There's a question here from Frank Payne, who says, how does one realistically challenge and hold politicians accountable for divisive and patently irresponsible rhetoric? In South Africa, this problem is rampant. You both alluded to this a little bit, but Joshua, maybe you could talk about, I'd love to know more about the campaign that you and others are waging currently against the regime of Buhari in order to try to maintain Twitter as a public forum. But just generally in terms of the type of environment that you're dealing with, the risks that you're facing, and how you see systemic change happening in the next few years to try to combat some of these problems.
All right, thank you. It's a fundamental human right, and that's why you would get, the collective of civic actors, fighting back and saying, you cannot bring us back to, using the words of, you can't take us to 1984, in that idiomatic meaning of 1984, which is you can censor the thoughts and the expression of people or the voice of dissent in the country, because it's a fundamental human right, which the country has signed up to Article 19 and every other kind of international treaty that the country is signed up to, and every other time, the government is trying to, be intolerant or use its own manipulative and dictatorial constitutionalism, to suppress, you've got to just continue to bring around the collective. And coming directly, picking it up from there, I think that what would bring about a critical change or reform in Nigeria now and beyond President Buhari would be, a collective collaboration, if you like, among key stakeholders, from media to civil society to even corporates, coming up to say, if you think because you need policymakers to continue to make a profit, you also need to know that the livelihood and the well-being of the people who will buy or consume your product at stake, then there's no profit to make. And begin to bring everybody to the table and say, this is a universal problem for us as a country, and we need to come together collaboratively and drop all our sentiments and all the narratives, some of which they spoke about, which is, bringing divisive, rhetorics into the conversation, dividing us along ethnic, dividing us along religious lines, and, it's really, really frustrating to listen to. I mean, what you would imagine are the intellectuals of the country now also pandering towards ethnic and religious rhetorics to begin to engage issues of fundamental human rights, issues of freedom and development of the country. But we've just got to wake up from there. We've got to come together collaboratively and engage this. But on a bigger, broader level of how you need to frontally engage this propaganda or manipulation of government is to then ensure that there are strategic digital information literacy. What we've had, what practitioners have done before now is to begin to do traditional, information and media literacy to people. But the war, the conversation is now digital. And when it's digital, like she mentioned, it's viral, it's just like the pandemic. Just before we woke up, millions were dying. Just before we woke up the next day, millions were, affected. So we've got to be able to see information from that viral, potential, and then come to the table and say, how do we ensure that people, are mentally aware and harmed when they come online or when they listen to rhetorics from politicians or even the media, because the media is also becoming a tool in the hands of the politicians to, to manipulate. And you've got to be able to say, come harmed, and you've got to also be aware of your own, biases, because most of the times, what's the instrumentality of disinformation? It's confirmation bias. So if you don't come with an open mind, if you don't come, aware of the virality of the kind of infection you're going to contact when you come online, then you're almost like a victim already, and you're just waiting to become a vector, if you like. And so those are the kind of things we must, as a collective, begin to think about. The corporate folks, the technology, giants in country and in region, need to begin to ask the question of how do we use technology to face this issue. And because at the moment, technology is what government is fighting, is waging war against, because that's what gives, the mass, virality to, the voice of dissent is what brings, it's what, proliferate even, the right information to fight malinformation. Right? So, so technology giants they need to become more responsible. They need to become more, strategic. They need to become more proactive, if you like, especially when it comes to things like elections. It's interesting the South Africa is going through it. I imagine the municipal elections. Nigeria is also going to be, will start the runoff elections very soon, and it means that the war is right here. And here we begin to come together as a collective to respond, and respond not only with action, but also respond with, with all that we got.
Yeah, just to offer support to Joshua. There's speaking about collective action. There are global practitioners and organization, international organizations. There hasn't been a proper African collective, a proper African response to misinformation, and I hope we can start building that. But with regards to the Nigerian election, we should have those conversations about being able to set up shop and say, we're going to monitor this election and strategize about what strategies can be put in place to make sure that, politicians don't abuse platforms for misinformation. And also just speaking to the platforms themselves. Twitter itself should have, as a company, instead of Jack Dorsey, putting out a tweet just saying "power to Nigeria." I remember what he used. He has the influence and the economic power to have reached out to the Nigerian government and said, this is not acceptable conduct, and they have that power. Corporates have so much power in order to support democracy and not circumvent it. And they don't use that power. They need to come on board and fight against undemocratic practices, but they sit in the sidelines. So I want to echo Josh's sentiments there, because until I don't think they realize just how much misinformation actually affects their bottom line. They should ask Bell Pottinger. That's what happens. It's an example of how when you are involved in a PR crisis like that, that's what happens. Your clients withdraw. So if they don't start well, I'm not saying that they must dabble in misinformation, but that's the danger of, if you are caught in a storm and you do not do the right thing and you do not contribute towards to strengthening democracy, that's what happens to you. Social media has the effect of,
canceling.
People get cancelled and your clients go and you sink. You need to put your money where your mouth is and start supporting initiatives that protect democracy. And it's really what's happened in Nigeria, and the lack of response from companies operating in Nigeria, from the Coca-Colas, from the MTN, South African companies that do business in Nigeria. Why haven't they responded? Why haven't they said anything? We should be putting pressure on them and saying, look, this is what's happened in Nigeria. You're a South African company. Why are you doing this? Why are you okay with this? What have you said? What have you done? Have you contacted the president? Why are you on the sidelines? Why this is happening?
Absolutely. It's just such a corporate trait to just sit on the sidelines quietly and say, oh, well, we manufacture Coke, or, we're in the business of telecommunications. We don't know anything about these things, and it doesn't affect us. So we didn't see anything. It's the common response, but it's also the common response from these technology companies who have garnered so much power over the last 2 decades, and knowingly so. And yes, of course, there's that argument that these are fundamental technologies that have changed the way we communicate, that have changed the way we live. They're businesses. They're allowed to operate however they want. They bring jobs and economic benefits and all of this stuff. But the point is, you cannot, in my opinion, be creating these platforms and then just seeing what happens with them, and kind of sitting back and watching the results. Sure, part of the journey of social media has been understanding that that a tool like that can become can change the world in fundamental ways. But then you've got to be prepared to be responsible and accountable for when things start to really fundamentally affect societies and create an immense amount of chaos, as we're seeing. But I was struck by something you said, Phumzile, earlier, which is, it's so important to be able to use the correct terms and to speak about these topics kind of dispassionately and be able to just differentiate between one thing and another. And I think for me, what's important is to be able to differentiate between truth and facts. I think truth is a term and a phenomenon that has been, people have rethought it. It's been kind of captured in its own way. My truth and your truth are different. My truth is as important as your truth, even if I'm using my truth to spread overt lies. And that's why I think it's important to talk about facts and fact-based storytelling, fact-based information. Both of you are involved in data gathering and understanding the importance of using facts and data, hard evidence, to help people understand the difference between this truth and that truth. How do we make that the norm? How do we make it easier for people to log onto a website or a platform and know, okay, hold on, this feels suspect. One of our viewers said something along these lines about critical thinking, and helping young people to engage in critical thinking and learn those skills. Any responses?
Yeah, I mean, that was what I said earlier about changing the terminology. People don't necessarily understand. I think fake news was an easy term to understand. This is fake news. But then alternative truths and, science, and oh no, science suddenly became demonized in COVID, and scientists are lying. What
critical
is
race
science?
theory. Now critical race theory is the new thing. It's like,
it's the most mind-boggling.
Calm down.
What do you mean science is not true, and there's no such thing as science? The scientists are lying, and this YouTube video said, the scientists are wrong. So we need to change the conversations. I am doing a lot of work, talking to a lot of behavioral scientists, because it's about media literacy. We need to move past that, knowledge that children go to school, and out of a textbook, you're taught history. We need to understand that it happens online now. The learning happens online. You Google, you go to Wikipedia. I think media literacy needs to start very early.
Agreed.
Very early on. And children need to be taught how to be discerning in the information they consume online. They need to be able to see what's facts and what isn't facts. I mean, for us, we can sit and say, no, science, this is the process of theory and peer-reviewed science, and know that conspiracy theory is not true, because this is the truth. It's peer-reviewed science. But for other people, they don't get that. And perhaps, for some people it's a lost cause, but I think for new generations, we can at least, start afresh and, teach them that when you're online, you need to appreciate that you might be lied to. And especially on social media, platforms themselves, they need to be held accountable. Their business model is around advertising, and is about viral content. And we know the viral content is often controversial, misinformation, conspiracy theories. So that kind of information is amplified. And in fact, even when conspiracy theories are fact-checked, they become amplified. Because, there'll be a conspiracy theory, and then a lot of people will be debunking it. But that actually, makes it even more viral. And people are like, well, why are you responding to it? And, all those responses are lies, so it must be true. So it's a whole mental process. So a lot of it, of changing it has to do with cognition now and behavioral science, and how do we change the way people consume information. So I think it is a multidisciplinary approach, and that is part of the team that we're going to assemble. And it needs, there's always a question, what is the solution? And there isn't one simple answer.
So complex, yeah.
It's complex.
Very complex.
It's media literacy. It's starting kids from a young age. It's the platforms and them changing their algorithms. It's media literacy. It's complicated, and it's constantly changing. But I think we should constantly be trying to seek solutions. And because the way that disinformation works changes, the strategies change from when it was bots. You understood this was a botnet, where it's changed now to sleeper accounts. And for people who don't know that, for example, there'll be sleeper accounts where there'll be maybe 50,000 accounts that will join Facebook, because Facebook will have changed their systems to be able to detect bots. So they will join, for example, they'll join a pot plant group, and they will contribute to that group, and they become like a normal user. And then all those accounts will suddenly be activated at the same time, and they will spread disinformation en masse. And then it's difficult for the platforms to shut those accounts down, because AI, machine learning technology will not be able to detect it because it will seem like an authentic account. So it's a constantly moving field, and it's just about staying abreast. But media literacy needs to start it soon, and it needs to start early.
Absolutely.
And it's fighting against tradition. And it's also just getting governments to understand the problem, which is a whole another, challenge that needs to be tackled to understand.
Absolutely.
You need to put media literacy in the curriculum.
You need to take this seriously from a very young age. Media literacy is so important. And I think that also comes back to understanding, well, first of all, it's important to know the source of your information and who's funding that information. Who are the people paying for this publication that I'm reading right now? If there's no masthead, if there's no one, if you can't go and find an editor and have a sense that there's a board behind this and this is a legitimate organization, then you're very likely reading the wrong stuff. But I think it's also important, and Joshua, maybe you could speak about this. I'm conscious of time, and we're getting so many great questions in the comment section. Just being able to understand the source of the primary source of disinformation is different in different places. I think we can safely argue that a primary source of disinformation in Nigeria is the government itself. The same would be for a government like Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed right now, pretending like everything's rosy in Tigray and focusing on his development agenda in Ethiopia. Meanwhile, people are being slaughtered in the streets and mass rape is being used as a weapon of war. And it's one narrative that's being fed to the international media. And then also understanding that there's other bad actors who are coming in for various different reasons. But how does one square that in a country like Nigeria, where you have a very specific channel of information with regards to how politics is perpetrated there?
So I'll say it starts with the media, sitting back and reflecting about the historical purpose of the media, which is trust, which is promoting the right kind of information, building trust in people, and not losing that trust to even the technology giants that the media itself is now tracking. So you talk of Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp becoming publishing platforms for the media. And it seems like the media itself needs to subscribe to technology companies to be able to promote this content. But more importantly is, how is the media paying attention to, gaining the trust of the people? You spoke about people reading things and not bothering themselves about who the editor is or the amount of experience or even the rationale behind the media platform that you're reading, and using that to consume the information you want to consume. I think that is one thing that the media needs to first pay attention to. The other is, let's just borrow their word and say you've got to be able to come with scientific alternative data, scientifically backed alternative data to break both the propaganda and the manipulated data that is called the official data set. We have a situation in Nigeria where the official data is telling us something different from what the reality on the street is. And we just have to regurgitate as the media what the official data is telling us, because that's all we have. But what's the place of galvanizing, and come back to collaboration, galvanizing pan-local media to gather its own data right from the grassroots and putting it side by side this official data, being transparent about your methodology, being tolerant or about criticism from the public. But while you're doing all of these, you're ensuring that you're building trust and you're providing the right information that can stand against the propaganda or that government wants to sell. What do we say when we say these people are selling advertisement? That's what the media already itself sold. It was negotiating trust. It was transacting trust for the adverts, right? So it's not as if the tech guys are doing something different. All they're doing is using influence socialism and translating it into information capitalism, if you like. I mean, so it's just for the media to begin to say, how do we use trust to navigate or to disrupt that whole system and provide that decision science? We say, I mean, from my mentor, like we talked to ourselves about 4 or 5 years ago, we say, until the media begins to see itself as a decision science, which means that the information we provide for the people will determine the kind of decisions that they make, then we are not yet ready to do anything. And that's why if we're not providing information that harm people to make the right decisions about even the information they're going to get from politicians or even their livelihood or their freedoms, then we're losing the battle right now. Right? Because what make people connect on social media? What make them, gravitate towards one another? What make them, socially connected or networked? It's the fact that they want decisions. I want to know where to buy this food stuff for my kid. I want to know the best, attire to wear. And my friends are reviewing and are sanctioning somebody as the best. And you've got to be able to, learn from that and then use that to provide the right decisions to people and say, don't wait until the elections. Give us the historical, characteristics of the politician. Let us know let's call everybody out. And so people are aware. You don't wait. I feel sorry that the same man that is, gagging the media in Nigeria today didn't just start today. He did it in the 80s. So how did he come back? Where was the media? How did the media, allow him to come back and do the same thing he had done to them as a military dictator, and now he's doing it as a democratic dictator, if you like. And it's for the media to always be, proactive to provide alternative and scientifically, evidence-based brand-truth thing to circumvent or to just help people make the right decisions about freedom and livelihood.
Absolutely. I hope that answers a couple of people's questions. I see, there's been some comments along those lines. Thank you so much for all your awesome questions. Guys, we've got another 3 minutes, so maybe we can just wrap up. There's a really interesting question here, and it speaks to something you just said, Joshua, which is from Alistair Crew, which is just an idea. How would you combat the friend group tribalism and misinformation? I think that is a huge problem, as Tiens Olsen calls it, the social bubbles. And you spoke about that earlier. Let's finish up here with some closing comments. This also speaks to some extent to this idea of freedom of expression and not shutting down freedom of expression while still trying to combat disinformation and how difficult that is. How do we find our communities and feel that we can communicate with them in the ways we want to and say the things that we want to, that we believe in, without spreading and perpetrating disinformation? And how do we hold one another to account when that happens? Final thoughts.
I think the online space is a democratic space. It gives you direct access to politicians. I was one not so long ago, and you have direct access. And you should be able to communicate freely, but just be careful that you do not share misinformation. Double check. If you're not sure, you can always delete, but be sure not to engage in hate speech, not to spread misinformation. If you're not sure, rather double check. Thank you to Daily Maverick, to FNF, and for everyone who joined the chats. And Joshua, we're here for you.
Awesome. Africa United. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just to take the information to them where they are. That's how you break echo chambers, right? You don't stand aloof and start to talk from afar. You've got to enter the echo chambers, either using technology or using platforms that are more conversational. You've got to go back to the, ABCs of communication for development. You've got to go back to the ABCs of grassroots communication, grassroots media. If you go back to, these African countries, you will see that what you have is nationalism even in the media ecosystem. Where are the grassroots media? Where's community radio? Where's community TV?
Yeah.
Where's community newspaper? You have a news desert. And that means until even development, philanthropy, everybody has to pay attention to going grassroots and taking the information to the echo chambers, or call it information tribalism, if you like. You've got to go down. You've got to move away from staying aloof or staying far from people, and we're trying to, provide the services of, factual information to, and then resolve it.
Absolutely. So important. Well, thank you both so much. And I love the phrase information capitalism. I'm going to start using that now, Joshua. I'm going to expropriate that phrase and start using it as my own. I hope you don't mind, but that's just such a great way of putting it. And that is so much of the problem, right? I wish we could keep going for another hour. This is such a fascinating and such an important conversation. You have so much to offer in this regard, and I just want to wish you all the best in your endeavors. Thank you for the work that you do. It's so very important. I hope that you continue to be recognized for it. And we're looking forward to hearing more about your campaign, Phumzile. Joshua will be watching what DataFight does in the next few years. Thank you both so much, and thank you to our viewers. One more time, thank you to Daily Maverick for having us. As always, such a fantastic platform, and to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation as well for your wonderful support. Just want to mention our film producers, I Steal Film and Storyscope, my co-producer Richard Poplack, and from all of us, thank you so much. Have a good evening. Take care.